You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. The shared responsibility model is a defining concept in cloud services and directly influences how privacy controls are allocated between customer and provider. In this model, cloud vendors are responsible for securing the underlying infrastructure, such as physical servers, network layers, and hypervisors, while customers retain responsibility for the configuration, data usage, and access control of the systems they deploy. This division often creates confusion, with organizations mistakenly assuming providers take full accountability for compliance obligations. For exam purposes, the key concept is allocation. Privacy risk must be carefully mapped to ensure responsibilities are clearly divided and documented. Scenarios may test whether the cloud vendor guarantees lawful processing by default, with the correct recognition being no. Understanding this principle ensures candidates grasp that shared responsibility requires customers to actively configure and monitor their environments, enforcing privacy obligations within their portion of the cloud stack. Party roles must be clarified in every third-party relationship to establish who controls data and who acts under instruction. Controllers decide purposes and means, processors execute instructions, service providers deliver functions under contract, and contractors or third parties may interact under broader business arrangements. Misclassification can create liability gaps if responsibilities are not properly assigned. For example, a payroll company receiving employee data may act as a processor, while a marketing firm designing independent campaigns may be a separate controller. For exam candidates, the key point is role precision. Regulators expect organizations to know their role in each processing activity. Scenarios may test whether vendors are always processors, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this ensures candidates understand that accountability is grounded in role assignment, making role clarity fundamental for compliance and contractual enforcement. A data processing agreement, or DPA, serves as the contractual backbone for third-party processing. It memorializes the customer's instructions, defines the scope of processing, and ensures the vendor acts only under those instructions. The DPA provides enforceability. If a vendor uses data beyond agreed purposes, the contract gives the customer leverage to demand correction or pursue remedies. It also aligns contractual obligations with regulatory expectations, particularly under GDPR and emerging U.S. state privacy laws. For exam candidates, the key takeaway is that DPAs are not optional. They are essential accountability instruments. Scenarios may test whether DPAs apply only in cross-border processing, with the correct recognition being no. Understanding DPAs ensures candidates grasp their role as the primary tool for documenting lawful processing and proving that vendors act only as authorized, minimizing risks of misuse or unauthorized secondary uses of data. Purpose limitation and lawful basis clauses are essential for anchoring DPAs in compliance principles. These clauses ensure that data may only be used for specified purposes, under a lawful basis such as consent, contractual necessity, or legal obligation. Without them, vendors could expand processing to unrelated activities, creating risks of misuse or regulatory violations. For exam candidates, the key terms are specificity and lawfulness. Scenarios may test whether broad, vague purposes like business improvement are sufficient, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this illustrates that lawful processing requires precise definition of scope and legal grounds, ensuring data is not exploited for secondary uses. Purpose limitation clauses serve as guardrails, reinforcing accountability by preventing function creep and creating contractual remedies if vendors deviate from their authorized remit. Compliance with law warranties and change-in-law adjustment mechanisms embed adaptability into vendor contracts. These provisions require vendors to comply with current laws and to adjust practices if new regulations impose additional obligations. Change-in-law clauses often specify how costs or responsibilities will be shared if legal frameworks evolve, reducing disputes during enforcement transitions. For exam candidates, the key concept is future-proofing. Scenarios may test whether compliance warranties apply only at contract signing, with the correct recognition being no. They persist throughout the engagement. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability must evolve with regulation, ensuring contracts remain enforceable tools for compliance, even as privacy laws expand, diversify, or impose stricter requirements across multiple jurisdictions during the vendor relationship. Security requirements clauses ensure vendors apply baseline technical and organizational safeguards. These may include mandatory encryption, access control, secure configuration, incident logging, and vulnerability management. Security clauses must be detailed enough to set enforceable standards, not vague commitments like reasonable safeguards. They also define responsibilities for monitoring and periodic reviews. For exam purposes, the key concept is enforceability. Security obligations must be measurable. Scenarios may test whether vague language suffices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this demonstrates that regulators and auditors expect specific, auditable requirements tied to data sensitivity and risk levels. These clauses reduce ambiguity, creating clear expectations that vendors must maintain proportionate security measures aligned with recognized frameworks such as ISO 27001 or NIST standards. Breach notification clauses specify what constitutes a reportable incident, establish notification timelines, and outline cooperation obligations. These provisions often mirror regulatory deadlines, such as 72 hours under GDPR, but may impose even shorter timelines contractually. They ensure vendors cannot delay disclosure, preventing controllers from missing statutory reporting windows. Cooperation duties require vendors to provide forensic details, assist with remediation, and support regulatory inquiries. For exam candidates, the key term is timeliness. Scenarios may test whether vendors can report incidents within a reasonable period, with the correct recognition being no specific timelines are required. Recognizing this illustrates that contracts must transform regulatory deadlines into enforceable vendor duties, ensuring breach response is immediate, coordinated, and transparent to preserve accountability and consumer trust. Subprocessor governance ensures transparency and accountability in extended supply chains. Clauses require vendors to disclose subcontractors, notify customers of proposed changes, and seek approval before onboarding new subprocessors. Flow-down obligations ensure that contractual terms, including security, purpose limitation, and notification clauses, are passed along to all downstream providers. For exam candidates, the key lesson is chain accountability. Organizations remain responsible even when data passes through multiple layers of vendors. Scenarios may test whether subprocessors must be identified, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this highlights that vendor oversight does not stop at direct contracts. Visibility must extend downstream, ensuring that every entity handling personal data is bound by consistent safeguards and enforceable accountability requirements. Audit and assessment rights give customers the ability to verify vendor compliance. These provisions allow for document reviews, third-party attestations, or on-site inspections, ensuring transparency into practices. Without audit rights, vendors may hide deficiencies until incidents occur. Customers rarely exercise full on-site audits for every vendor, but the contractual right itself drives accountability and signals seriousness. For exam candidates, the key concept is verification. Scenarios may test whether reliance on vendor self-attestations alone is sufficient, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this underscores that accountability requires documented, auditable evidence. Audit clauses empower organizations to confirm compliance proactively, building defensibility in regulatory reviews and giving vendors strong incentives to maintain required safeguards continuously. Data subject rights assistance clauses bind vendors to support controllers in fulfilling consumer requests. These include obligations to provide access, correct inaccurate data, delete records, or facilitate opt-outs within defined timelines. Vendors often control the systems or data necessary for these actions, making their cooperation essential. For exam purposes, the key concept is cooperation. Scenarios may test whether controllers alone must manage data subject rights, with the correct recognition being no vendors must assist. Recognizing this ensures candidates understand that accountability extends to third parties, and that contracts must explicitly require vendor assistance to ensure organizations can meet their statutory deadlines for responding to rights requests, avoiding fines or reputational damage from incomplete compliance. International transfer terms are essential when vendors process data across borders. These clauses typically reference standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules, or adequacy decisions, ensuring that cross-border flows remain lawful. Contracts must document which mechanisms apply and require vendors to implement supplementary safeguards, such as encryption or access restrictions, if necessary. For exam candidates, the key concept is lawfulness of transfer. Scenarios may test whether transfers to affiliates abroad require contractual clauses, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this reinforces that international sharing cannot occur informally. Contracts must embed mechanisms to preserve compliance, demonstrate diligence, and provide organizations with enforceable remedies if vendors mishandle cross-border transfers. Confidentiality obligations and personnel vetting requirements protect against insider risks. Vendors must ensure their staff are bound by confidentiality agreements, trained in privacy principles, and screened for suitability before being granted access to sensitive data. These commitments reduce risks of intentional or negligent misuse by individuals inside the vendor organization. For exam purposes, the key concept is personnel accountability. Scenarios may test whether confidentiality applies only to executives, with the correct recognition being no, it applies to all staff with access. Recognizing this highlights that privacy risks arise from human factors as much as technology, making personnel obligations an essential part of third-party contracts and accountability systems. Data minimization, retention limits, and verified deletion clauses ensure vendors do not hold personal information indefinitely. Contracts must specify retention periods, require secure deletion once processing ends, and demand evidence of compliance. These provisions prevent unnecessary exposure and support regulatory requirements around lifecycle management. For exam candidates, the key concept is lifecycle closure. Scenarios may test whether vendors can retain data for future opportunities without approval, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this reinforces that contractual controls must align with minimization and deletion principles, ensuring that personal data is processed only as long as necessary and disposed of responsibly when no longer needed. Privacy by design commitments in vendor contracts demonstrate that security and privacy must be built into systems from the outset. Clauses may reference secure development lifecycle practices, requiring vendors to conduct threat modeling, vulnerability testing, and regular updates. These provisions ensure that privacy is not retrofitted but embedded into processes and products. For exam purposes, the key concept is proactive safeguards. Scenarios may test whether vendors can defer privacy considerations until after deployment, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this illustrates how privacy by design commitments transform abstract principles into enforceable obligations, requiring vendors to embed accountability and foresight into their technology development processes. Records, logs, and documentation clauses ensure accountability is evidenced. Vendors must maintain detailed logs of access, processing activities, and security events, and provide these records to customers upon request. Documentation supports audits, incident investigations, and regulatory reviews, providing a trail that demonstrates compliance with contractual and legal obligations. For exam candidates, the key concept is evidence generation. Scenarios may test whether verbal assurances suffice as compliance proof, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability depends on documentation. Organizations must be able to show not only that safeguards exist, but also that they are continuously monitored, recorded, and auditable for defensibility in investigations or audits. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Pre-contract due diligence provides the first opportunity for organizations to evaluate whether a cloud or third-party vendor can be trusted with sensitive data. This process is broader than a surface-level review. It examines security certifications, regulatory compliance, financial stability, incident history, and governance practices. Privacy due diligence often includes questionnaires covering encryption, access controls, data retention, and incident response, along with document reviews of certifications like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. Legal reviews confirm that the vendor can operate lawfully in applicable jurisdictions, while security teams may conduct penetration tests or vulnerability scans. For exam candidates, the key lesson is scope. Due diligence must be multidimensional, addressing privacy, security, and legal compliance together. Scenarios may test whether contracts alone are sufficient proof of vendor reliability, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that due diligence builds a factual basis for trust before obligations are finalized. Evidence collection validates vendor claims through standardized artifacts such as SOC 2 audit reports and ISO 27001 certifications. These documents provide independent assurance that vendors have implemented and tested controls for security, availability, confidentiality, and privacy. Society 2 reports, particularly Type 2, detail how controls operated over time, while ISO certifications confirm alignment with international standards. Evidence reviews may also include penetration test reports, data protection policies, or third-party audit results. For exam candidates, the key takeaway is substantiation. Self-attestations are insufficient. Scenarios may test whether certifications must be verified, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this ensures candidates understand that due diligence relies on objective, verifiable evidence to confirm vendor reliability and support defensible regulatory responses if vendor practices are later scrutinized. Cloud architecture evaluation assesses whether the vendor's technical design supports privacy and security. This review examines identity management systems, tenant segregation in multi-tenant environments, encryption of data in transit and at rest, and hardening of configurations against misuses such as overly permissive access. Organizations must verify whether controls such as multi-factor authentication, logging, and monitoring are enabled by default or require configuration. For learners, the key concept is architecture assurance. Privacy compliance requires technical alignment, not just contractual promises. On the exam, scenarios may test whether cloud providers automatically ensure privacy compliance, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that customers retain shared responsibility for evaluating and configuring architecture securely, ensuring design supports contractual and regulatory obligations consistently. Regulatory mapping ensures that vendors meet sector-specific requirements for data they will process. Health data may invoke HIPAA obligations, financial records may trigger Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act duties, and student information may fall under FERPA. Vendors must demonstrate their readiness to support these obligations, often through tailored policies or industry certifications. For exam candidates, the key lesson is specificity. Compliance must be contextualized to the type of data handled. Scenarios may test whether one generic compliance program covers all sectors, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that vendor oversight requires mapping to specific laws, ensuring that contractual and technical safeguards directly address applicable regulatory frameworks, reducing the risk of gaps when handling sensitive or regulated personal information. Evaluating key personnel and access practices ensures that only vetted and authorized individuals handle sensitive data. Due diligence must confirm that vendors conduct background checks, restrict access on a need-to-know basis, and revoke access immediately upon role changes. Personnel controls address one of the most common vulnerabilities in data protection: insider misuse or error. For exam candidates, the key terms are vetting and access discipline. Scenarios may test whether contractual controls alone suffice, with the correct recognition being no people-based controls are equally vital. Recognizing this highlights that protecting personal data depends on securing human access, ensuring that vendor staff meet trustworthiness standards equivalent to those applied within the contracting organization. Continuous monitoring programs keep vendor oversight current beyond the onboarding stage. These programs may include periodic reassessments, ongoing control testing, and monitoring of service performance against agreed standards. Vendors may be asked to update SOC 2 reports annually, submit incident logs, or respond to new questionnaires when legal frameworks change. Performance metrics such as uptime or issue resolution times help measure whether contractual commitments are being met. For exam candidates, the key concept is continuity. Scenarios may test whether initial due diligence is sufficient, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this reinforces that vendor compliance must be verified throughout the contract lifecycle, ensuring risks remain managed as systems evolve and regulatory expectations expand. Service-level agreements and key performance indicators tie vendor accountability directly to privacy outcomes. SLAs define expected performance, such as availability, response times, or recovery objectives, while KPIs measure privacy-specific commitments like incident reporting timelines or error correction rates. Linking SLAs and KPIs to privacy ensures vendors are judged not just on technical performance, but also on how well they protect personal data. For exam candidates, the key takeaway is measurability. Outcomes must be quantifiable. Scenarios may test whether KPIs must include privacy objectives, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this highlights how SLAs and KPIs integrate privacy into broader service contracts, making accountability visible and enforceable for regulators, customers, and business leaders. Incident coordination playbooks outline how vendors and customers collaborate when data breaches or privacy issues occur. These playbooks define roles, responsibilities, and timelines for detection, notification, investigation, and remediation. Coordination ensures incidents are handled efficiently, avoiding duplication or missed responsibilities. For exam purposes, the key concept is integration. Vendor playbooks must align with customer incident response processes. Scenarios may test whether organizations can rely solely on vendor procedures, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this demonstrates that coordinated playbooks are essential for timely response, ensuring organizations can meet regulatory deadlines and manage public communications effectively while minimizing harm to individuals and business operations. Exit strategy planning ensures that vendors can be disengaged without creating privacy or operational gaps. Strategies must cover data portability, secure transition services, and verified deletion or return of personal information at contract end. Exit clauses may also require vendors to provide transition support for a defined period to reduce disruption. For exam candidates, the key term is portability. Organizations must confirm they can retrieve and migrate data in a secure, usable format. Scenarios may test whether exit planning is optional, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires planning for closure from the start, ensuring vendors remain bound to privacy and security obligations through the full life cycle of the relationship. Shadow IT discovery helps identify unauthorized cloud services or third-party tools that may be processing data without proper oversight. Employees often adopt software-as-a-service platforms for convenience, bypassing procurement or compliance processes. Such tools create risks of unvetted data transfers and poor security. Discovery techniques may include monitoring network traffic, reviewing expense reports, or conducting employee surveys. For exam candidates, the key term is detection. Scenarios may test whether shadow IT must be addressed, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this illustrates that privacy programs must uncover and manage unauthorized sharing to maintain comprehensive accountability across all data flows, not just those formally documented. Fourth-party risk oversight extends accountability beyond direct vendors to the subcontractors they use. Transparency into supply chains ensures organizations understand who else has access to personal data and under what conditions. Contracts may require vendors to disclose fourth parties, flow down obligations, and provide evidence of oversight. For exam purposes, the key lesson is extended accountability. Regulators expect organizations to know not just their vendors but also the vendors' vendors. Scenarios may test whether oversight stops at direct contracts, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this demonstrates that modern risk management must account for full supply chain complexity, preserving accountability through multiple layers of service delivery. Encryption key ownership clauses determine who controls access to data stored in the cloud. Bring your own key models allow customers to retain ownership, reducing risks of unauthorized vendor access. Contracts must clarify whether vendors or customers hold responsibility for key management, rotation, and revocation. For learners, the key concept is control. On the exam, scenarios may test whether encryption without key ownership guarantees exclusive protection, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that true privacy assurance requires clarity over key ownership, ensuring that sensitive information cannot be accessed or decrypted by unauthorized parties, even if stored securely in vendor environments. Remediation and corrective action plans formalize how vendor deficiencies are addressed once identified. These plans must include milestones, defined timelines, and validation evidence to confirm closure. For example, if a vendor fails an encryption audit, they may be required to implement corrective measures within 90 days, with proof submitted for review. For exam candidates, the key term is remediation. Scenarios may test whether issues can remain open-ended, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this reinforces that oversight means more than identifying problems. It requires enforcing solutions, ensuring vendors resolve weaknesses, and remain accountable to continuous compliance expectations. Board and executive reporting ties vendor risk oversight into enterprise governance. Reports translate technical metrics into business language, highlighting potential regulatory penalties, reputational damage, or operational disruptions caused by vendor failures. Dashboards may show vendor tiers, incident counts, remediation status, and reassessment schedules. Boards expect to see clear connections between vendor risk and business outcomes, enabling informed decision-making about investment in controls or diversification of providers. For exam purposes, the key lesson is translation. Privacy leaders must present vendor oversight in terms executives understand. Scenarios may test whether technical reports alone suffice, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability must reach the highest levels, ensuring vendor risks are integrated into enterprise risk management discussions. By combining strong DPAs with rigorous due diligence, organizations establish a defensible framework for cloud and third-party sharing. Contracts define obligations, while due diligence and monitoring ensure vendors live up to them in practice. For exam candidates, the synthesis is clear. Accountability requires both legal instruments and operational verification. Recognizing this highlights how privacy programs must unite contractual strength with continuous oversight, ensuring third-party partnerships remain trustworthy, compliant, and aligned with organizational values throughout their life cycle. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.